Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Gamescript. We're looking at the Germany game this week. Miami Dolphins are playing against the Kansas City Chiefs in Germany. The total is 50.5 points, with the Chiefs as 1.5 point favorites. At one point, the Dolphins were the favorites of this game, but it swapped over to the Chiefs. So we have a lot of debate over who the favorites of this game should be this week, and for good reason. Miami is one of the highest output offenses in the league right now, as well as the Chiefs. The Chiefs are always one of the highest scoring offenses in the league, and to this year is no different. The difference this year is the Chiefs don't really have weapons in the passing game apart from Travis Kelce. The Chiefs have been struggling to get the wide receiver core going. Meanwhile, on the Miami side, they have been firing on all cylinders all year. So it is a interesting matchup this week. We're not seeing the Chiefs that we're used to. We're seeing a Chiefs team that is relying more on its defense than it has in the past. The defense is what's carrying the team this year for the most part. Meanwhile, in Miami, we're looking at a team that's defense is not been that good this year. They got Vic Fangio as the defensive coordinator this year. Usually his defenses take a little while to get going. And this year, they've also been dealing with injuries between Xavier Howard and Jalen Ramsey, both missing time throughout the season. And it looks like this week we might see those guys both playing for the first time or one of the first times this season. So the defense is getting healthy. Miami's offensive line is also getting healthy. We should see Teron Armstead and Connor Williams both back this week. They are looking questionable for the game, on the positive side of questionable, though. So matchups are going to be good on both sides. The Chiefs are having trouble on getting pressure this year. They're one of the middling teams as far as generating pressure, and Tua does really well when he's not pressured. He's one of the top quarterbacks in the league when he's not facing pressure. So the matchup is good for Tua. Meanwhile, on the Kansas City side, the Chiefs do a lot of two tight end sets, whereas Miami has struggled against that type of offense. And of course, we have the revenge game of Tyreek Hill this week. Will Tyreek Hill get revenge on the Chiefs this week? The Chiefs and Tyreek have had words back and forth. Tyreek he's been very vocal since he left Kansas City, throwing some shade at the Chiefs, including saying that Tua is a more accurate quarterback than Patrick Mahomes. And as we've seen from Tua the past couple years, that might actually be true. And Sunday's $1 million question is going to be, what do we see out of Tyreek Hill this week? Will he have a revenge game? Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of Gamescript. I'm Simon Edwards, aka Pumacom, at Pumacom with Heatseeker Sports, and today I'm going to be analyzing the Miami Dolphins versus Kansas City Chiefs game. That's over in Germany. We're looking at a 50.5 point total. As I mentioned at the top, Miami is currently 1.5 point dogs, and there's a lot of things going for both of these teams. Miami has been on fire this year. Tyreek Hill is on pace to have one of the best fantasy seasons of all time, and he's on pace to maybe break the record as far as yards for wide receiver this year. He's already at 1,000, and we are about halfway through the game, so he's on pace to generate about 2,000 yards of receiving this year. So interesting game today. Tyreek Hill also used to play with the Chiefs, obviously, and he did not go quietly after he left the Chiefs, talking up Tua and talking about how Tua is more accurate than Patrick Mahomes. Chiefs fans didn't like that. But, you know, it's shaping up as a revenge game scenario for Tyreek Hill this week. Kansas City didn't want to pay him, and so he ended up with Miami. So interesting game all around. I got some interesting stats to kind of favor both sides and to favor some interesting angles that we can take when building lineups. Before I get into that, make sure to hit like on the video. I'm looking for 15 likes before I put out a shorter video with my favorite plays. And hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. I think I'm one of the few channels that actually covers these international games in depth. So if you like playing these showdown slates and building showdown lineups for these international games, and you're looking for content to kind of cover all the angles on these games, you're definitely going to want to subscribe to this channel. A lot of times I'll have Spread a Stare analyzing these international games with me. Was not able to get Spread on this week, but maybe we'll get him back on next week. But should be a good game. Got the highest point total on the slate, and things are looking good for this game. So I'll get into that now. I'll just jump over to our DraftKings player pool, and we can go over all these players and the angles that we can potentially look at this week. Tyreek Hill being the top guy. Tyreek's been on fire, as we talked about. Looking at 28 points, 25 points, 31 points, 35 points, 33 points. I can't envision Tyreek not being a top-owned captain this week, and it's for good reason. Let me check and see what the captain ownership is for him right now. Yeah, don't really have any ownership projections just yet, but I would imagine that Tyreek's going to be the highest owned captain. That's why you want to hit like on this video. I'll have my final thoughts a little bit later tonight or early tomorrow, which I can put out to give a better idea of what I'm thinking for the players that I like the most on this slate. But right now I'm leaning Tyreek as my favorite captain, even though he has the ownership situation. For Patrick Mahomes has kind of had an off year this year, but he's still been able to generate fantasy points. He's had 37 points, 21 points, 25 points, 25 points, and 20 points. Those are his highest scoring weeks. For Patrick Mahomes, we're used to actually seeing more points than that. So it's been an off year for him, but he's got really only Travis Kelce to throw to. So he's had a bad situation as far as the weapons that he has that is available to him. Patrick Mahomes is, if you're only doing one or two lineups, Patrick Mahomes would be a fade candidate this week, just because he hasn't been generating the fantasy points, and we have to choose one of these high dollar guys to fade. And Patrick Mahomes is an interesting decision there. We got Travis Kelce as well. Travis Kelce is pretty much the only weapon that Patrick Mahomes has to throw to. Kelce has put up point totals of 39, 24, 22. He had a 19, about 20 point output in week 3 against Chicago. So Travis Kelce, I think, is a guy that I would prefer over Patrick Mahomes, just because Kelce is the PPR generator. So he's going to be getting all those PPR points. And if Mahomes is only throwing to one guy, basically, then I want to have the guy that he's throwing to over Mahomes if I have to make that decision. And I like Kelce in this matchup. Miami has been pretty weak against tight ends this year. What are they doing against tight ends? They're allowing the 4th most catches and 6th most yards to tight ends this season. So that puts Kelce in a good spot. Only thing that I would say with Kelce is, if Miami decides to put one of their elite corners on Kelce, then that will slow Kelce down, because both the corners are physical corners. They're both elite corners, Jalen Ramsey and Xavier Howard. We got tough matchups for Kelce with those cornerbacks. And, if we look to the games that Kelce has played against tough cornerbacks, he played against the Broncos with Surtain last week. I'd have to look to see how much Surtain actually affected Kelce, but Kelce only had 12 points last week, but also, Mahomes was obviously slowed down last week. When they went up against the Jets with Sauce Gardner, Kelce only put up 12 points. And those have been basically the weeks where they played the most elite corners that Kansas City has faced on the season. In the other game that Kansas City faced off against Denver, Kelce ended up scoring 24 points. So, Denver was a lot more physical against Kelce, though, this past week, and it slowed him down a bit. So that's an interesting spot there. But I do like Kelce over Mahomes if I have to choose between the two this week. Tua Tagovailoa is having a great season this week as well. If you're having to choose between, two of these four guys, I'd probably go Kelce and Tyreek. End up fading maybe Tua, although Tua has more weapons at his disposal than Mahomes. If you're picking, maybe three out of those four guys, maybe I'd go Tua, Tyreek, and Kelce, just based on the fact that Tua is also, he's facing a tough matchup, but he's also, he's also one of the best quarterbacks when he's not being pressured. Top two quarterback, I believe. And the Chiefs have not been able to generate pressure despite having, one of the best defenses in the league this year. And I think Tua should do all right in this matchup. It shouldn't affect him too much because obviously, when you're throwing to guys like Tyreek and Waddle, he's got the weapons. They also have a run game that can be mixed in. And the Chiefs are potentially missing both starting linebackers this week. They're already missing Bolton, and it looks like they might be missing Willie Gay as well. Willie Gay is questionable, but it looks like he might actually end up being out. You're going to want to keep an eye on the injury situation for the Chiefs this week. But without both starting safeties, that obviously puts Tua in a more favorable position. So it's kind of opposite directions with Miami's defense getting healthier and Kansas City's defense is getting less healthy. So we got Jalen Waddle. Waddle's been struggling against injuries of his own this year, but the past few weeks, it looks like he's been getting better. 28 fantasy points last week against New England. Then he had 12 fantasy points before that against Philly. And against Carolina, he had 18 fantasy points and 14 versus the Giants. So Waddle's been getting healthier. And Waddle is a guy that you're going to want in your player pool. He is expensive too at 9,400. Going to have to make some tough decisions with these expensive guys this week. Pacheco is in an interesting situation this week because the Dolphins are probably going to be using less heavy boxes this week against the Chiefs. And Kansas City, we've seen them take the easy route when they have the opportunities present themselves. And if they're getting less stacked boxes, they're also going to want to keep that that Miami offense out of the game, off the field. So they might run out strategy to run out a bunch of clock this week. And Pacheco would benefit from a strategy like that. Also with Mahomes, he's recovering from the flu. He went from a flu game last week to, they're having a late flight this week. They waited till Thursday to fly out to Germany. So there's going to be less rest for the offense. Miami took the opposite route. They went to Germany on Tuesday, so they have a rest advantage there. We've seen with teams, Spread and I've been talking about this all year, these travel advantages that teams that fly out early, they've looked a lot sharper on the field on game day versus these guys who've flown out late. They've looked sloppy and been, mistake prone. And in a situation like this game, I wouldn't be surprised if the offense of Kansas City is a little bit sluggish. If you're looking for an angle to take the under, I would say the sluggishness of the Kansas City offense, but also both these teams might rely more on their run games this week because they're going to want to keep the other side off the field. So, like I said, that makes Pacheco interesting. And Pacheco hasn't had, like a spectacular season this week, but he's been putting up the types of points that would be beneficial in a 1-game slate. Problem with Pacheco, he's also expensive. He's 8,600. So, he's going to be a decision that we have to make as well. Mostert is in an interesting situation because their offensive line is healthy for the first time in weeks. Mostert's been sluggish recently, 10 points last week, 6 points a week before that. But, he scored 37 points against Carolina, which was a good matchup for him, and 16 points against the Giants. Earlier in the season, he had that 45-point game against Denver, 28 points against New England. So Mostert's been on fire this year. And Kansas City is also, missing those 2 linebackers, or potentially missing both linebackers. That is going to be beneficial for Mostert, on top of if the Dolphins decide to run the ball more this week to keep Kansas City off the field. And little fact, Mostert's mother is from Germany. So Mostert has a Germany tie this week. So Mostert is very, very interesting this week against the Chiefs, and he's a good pivot off the more popular options this week. So Mostert, keep him in your player pool. Rashee Rice is the only wide receiver that's done anything really for Kansas City. He didn't do anything last week, but the week before that, he had 3 weeks in a row with double-digit fantasy points. He's getting up there on price, but he's the only reliable receiver on the Chiefs, and he's really the only receiver that I'd be interested in with all these studs on the slate, and more interesting ways you can go with cheaper guys. So Rashee Rice, I'm going to keep him in my player pool, but I'm not going to be locking him in or having too high exposure to any of these Chiefs wide receivers this week, probably. Sanders is the kicker for Miami. Hasn't really done too much, but the Dolphins have been scoring a lot of touchdowns. It could be a situation where facing a tougher defense in the Chiefs, maybe their drives stall out a little bit more in the red zone, and that makes Sanders more interesting. But they priced up the kickers this year, looking at a 54 price point on Sanders for a guy who's only scored 7 fantasy points a game. So that's not really interesting to me. Harrison Butker is much more interesting to me because I think the Chiefs, with the offensive struggles that they've had this year, I think Butker is going to be set up with a lot more field goal attempts. He scored double-digit points in most games this year. And against the Denver Broncos, when Vic Fangio was the defensive coordinator over there, Harrison Butker, he did really well against the Broncos. He had 3 field goals in just about every game that they played up against each other. He had 1 game where he had 2 field goals, and he had 1 game where he had 5 field goals as well. So for the most part, Butker was averaging 3 field goals a game against Vic Fangio defenses. So keep that in mind with Harrison Butker tonight. Fangio has experience against these Chiefs. He knows how to defend them. So keep that in mind. One thing also with that Fangio note there, the Travis Kelce matchup has been up and down against Fangio. He had a few weeks where he scored over 20 fantasy points. He had 2 weeks to be exact. He had 128 DraftKings point week, and he had 130 DraftKings point week. The other weeks he played against Fangio, 10 points, 6 points, 5 points, 13 DraftKings points. So he's been up and down against Fangio, but in an offense where he's really the only guy for Mahomes to throw to, I don't know if you want to take too much stock in those stats, but if you're looking for an angle to leave him out, if you have to leave out one of these high price guys, maybe look to his history against Vic Fangio defenses. So let's see. We got Marquez Valdez-Scantling, as I mentioned. Not really interested in these wide receivers for the Kansas City side, especially at 4,800. I'd be much more interested in Jerick McKinnon, who's at 4,400. If they're playing from behind, maybe they use McKinnon a little bit more. But McKinnon, he hasn't done anything this year either. It's been, just a bunch of guys on that Kansas City side who don't do anything. We talk about it every time they're on a showdown slate. Tony's another one. He hasn't done anything this year. Any one of these guys could pop off, but it's like rolling the dice on which one of these guys could do it in a given week. See, Cedric Wilson has been, he, I think, was the guy that we needed in that Philly game. He was $200 or something. He ended up scoring 7 points, and he ended up in the optimal. So he was the cheap guy that we needed. I think I was talking about Berrios in that game, or maybe Chase Claypool. Ended up being Cedric Wilson in that slot spot against those Eagles. So we move on to the Dolphins D. Don't have a lot of interest in the Dolphins D in this game. Chiefs D. Not really interested in I'm not really interested in either Ds this week. And this is, there's been weeks where I've been high on defenses, and for the most part, I've been good with those, like the Jets versus the Bills in week 1, and then Raiders versus the Chargers a couple weeks ago. Both those, Raiders versus whoever they played in primetime the other day. Those were both defenses that I was high on. They ended up coming through for us. There's been a couple others too. I can't remember, but when I've been on the defenses, I've been pretty good about it. Did not hit on the past game though. I was high on the defense against the Titans this past week, and they actually did well. They ended up getting 4 sacks and a turnover. They just didn't get the pick 6 that we needed for them to be relevant. Let's see, Jeff Wilson. I like Jeff Wilson this week. He's only 2,400. Again, with those missing linebackers for Kansas City. And I think that Miami's going to utilize their run game this week. I think Jeff Wilson is interesting. Just to kind of add to that point, the Dolphins are a team that tends to adapt to opponents' weakness. And we have seen that with their performances this year. So, when they faced off against the Chargers were the 6th worst team against wide receivers, and Tyreek ended up being the highest scoring guy in that game with 47.5 points. They focused on the run game that week. When they faced off against New England took away Tyreek, and then their next biggest weakness was against the running game, because we know Belichick is willing to give up yards in the running game. That's when Mostert ended up scoring 28.7 points against Denver, who is the worst team against the run game. We obviously saw what the Dolphins were able to do against them, with A-Chain scoring 54 DraftKings points and Mostert scoring 45 DraftKings points. Big part of why Denver is the worst game is because of those two performances there. Denver was also bad against the pass game, and Tua and Tyreek had big games that week. If we're looking at the Buffalo game, Buffalo's weakness is against running back. A-Chain scored 30 points against that first game against Buffalo. If we're looking at the Giants game, the Giants have been weak against wide receiver, and Tyreek is the one who went off that week at 35 points. So you kind of get the picture. The Carolina Panthers are weakest against the running back, and Miami had 37 points against them. So if we're looking at the matchup here this week, the angle I'm going for is, Miami's going to see that weak spot against the, the linebacker being out for the Kansas City side, but also, Kansas City is probably giving up the most DraftKings points to running back. Slot receiver would also be another weakness, but running back, I think, is a weakness if you're looking for one in Kansas City's defense. As far as what we've seen these past couple weeks as well, the Javon T. Williams had a big game against them last week, and they've shown cracks in their defense via their run defense. Javonte scored 19 points against them. We saw Joshua Kelly score 13 points against them. So there's been signs of weakness recently. They haven't really faced too many difficult opponents when it comes to the run game. When they faced off against the Chargers, it was Eckler coming back from his high ankle sprain. So I'm not really counting that. Eckler only had 6 points against them. Other than that, they faced Denver. Their run game hasn't gotten going. Minnesota's run game hasn't been good. Against the Jets, that was Breece Hall hadn't been going yet. Gotten going. He was still splitting carries with Dalvin Cook. So they didn't really play a factor in that game. Chicago Bears, Roshan Johnson and Khalil Herbert didn't do anything against them. So ETN was still sluggish in the beginning of the season when they faced off against him. So, I mean, you can make a case for that run game on Miami is the main point of all this. And I like Jeff Wilson. Jeff Wilson, 5.7 points last week at 1.4 coming back against Philly. But Mostert is a guy, he's not a guy that lasts the whole season when it comes to being a starter. Last year, we saw a 50-50 split between Jeff Wilson and Mostert. I would imagine that we're going to get back to that this season with Jeff Wilson. A-Chain still out. A-Chain will play a much bigger role when he comes back. But right now, I would guess that Jeff Wilson gets a lot of work this week, and he's only 2,400. So he's probably going to be highly owned, but I like him. Another thing for Pacheco's matchup is Edwards-Helaire is out this week, so that boosts Pacheco's matchup. Berrios, not really too interested in Berrios this week. He is questionable regardless, but he hasn't really done anything. He had one big week against Buffalo, but he's in a timeshare with Cedric Wilson and Chase Claypool for that slot role. So Berrios' situation is not as good as it has been earlier in the season. Sky Moore, another one of these wide receiver crapshoots on the Kansas City side. He's had one big week. Hasn't done anything since. We have Chase Claypool, guy I just mentioned. Not too interested there, although we did see that slot was a weakness. If you could call it that, for the Kansas City side. They're weak in that they have given up, as far as DraftKings points, 16 and a half points a game to the slot position. And, that's been basically the most points of any position that they've given up points to, even quarterback. So, slot receivers might be interesting this week against Kansas City. We also got River Craycraft. Oh, it looks like they put him on IR. He might be coming off of IR. He's designated for return. So, yeah, Craycraft might be back this week. We'll see. Keep an eye on that injury report. But, I still like those other slot receivers more than River Craycraft this week. If we're gonna go dumpster diving or looking for salary relief there. Salvin Ahmed, not really interested there with Jeff Wilson back. McCole Hardman, is interesting at $1,000. You know, Hardman is a guy that was heavily integrated into the offense. They brought him back from the Jets. You know, Hardman's got a history in this offense, and they're struggling to find playmakers. Maybe Hardman makes an impact, and he's now been back with the Chiefs for a couple weeks since getting traded from the Jets. So keep Hardman in mind if you're looking for one of these receivers, and he's only 1K. So Noah Gray's another guy. Like I mentioned the two tight end sets. Noah Gray could be a touchdown week for Noah Gray this week, and he's only $600. So I will be having him in my player pool, especially if we're going to be needing to search for that salary relief. Beyond that, I don't really see too much that I like this week. So, you know, given that situation, let's build a lineup that I think might be, you know, like the chalkier build this week. I think, you know, maybe Patrick Mahomes or Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce are going to be the highest owned captain. I just don't know yet. I would probably guess Mahomes. You know, Mahomes, we're getting the passing game at least. If Travis Kelce gets shut down by a physical Miami defense, and then, you know, let's say that theoretically they put one of those corners on Kelce, that makes his matchup a lot less attractive this week. So let's get Mahomes in there. Let's put in Tyreek because, you know, Tyreek is Tyreek, and let's get Tua in there too, just to get another high price guy in there. I mentioned Jeff Wilson that I like. You know, I think he's going to be popular this week, and he's an easy guy to plug in. It gives us that salary relief. Let's put in Pacheco because I do like his matchup, and that would give us the salary relief that we need to, you know. So this is putting us in a rough spot as far as salary. It puts us over. So if we take out maybe Jeff Wilson and we put in Mecole Hardman because he's only 1K, and we know his history with Mahomes. Yeah, that gives us 600 remaining. So that leaves us in Noah Gray territory. If we wanted to take Mahomes out, given these constraints that he's given us, and put in Tyreek's even more expensive than him. Let's say we put in Kelce over Mahomes. Let's say we leave Mahomes out of this lineup. We put in Kelce. Let's take out Hardman. Let's put in Jeff Wilson again. Obviously, we want to put in Tyreek, but let's put in Wilson. Let's see where that leaves us. Leaves us with 400. Another tough spot. Let's take Pacheco out. Let's put in, let's see. If we take out Pacheco and we put in Rashid Rice, all right, let's put in Butker. If we put in Butker, that leaves us with 3,800. You know, that leaves you with the crapshoot of if you want to go Tony, CJ Wilson, like Dolphins and Chiefs D. You know, that puts them all on the table. If you wanted to, you know, maybe we take out Wilson and maybe we put back in Hardman in this build. That leaves us with 5,200. That gives you McKinnon and Valdez-Scantling as options. But, you know, it's tough to put one of those guys in if we take Tua out and put Mahomes in, knowing that we're going heavy on that passing game. You know, that leaves us with options like Tony, you know, CJ Wilson. At that point, here we go. Yeah, Jeff Wilson, that leaves us with. So, you know, like at that point, we're going with a 4-2 Kansas City build. I think those are going to be popular actually this week. I think a lot of the lineups are going to be generated towards 4-2 Kansas City builds, and you can see why with these salary constraints that we're dealing with this week. So that's one idea for direction for a Kansas City side. You know, in this we got Mahomes, you know, having more success in the passing game. Travis Kelce is receiving the bulk of that work as far as like a PPR perspective. We got, McCole Hardman is, he's coming back and he's paying off that $1,000 salary. We got Harrison Butker. Mahomes is getting a lot of PPR points to Kelce, but they're not converting on the touchdowns. So, Pacheco is not in the lineup, but Butker is coming in and he's, mopping it up with those field goals. Maybe Hardman, gets a long touchdown or gets some sort of a trick play touchdown or something like that. And then on the side of the Dolphins, Tyreek, he's just getting regular Tyreek work, putting up 30 DraftKings points. And then Jeff Wilson, is in there doing a lot of damage on the side of the let's try something here. Let's put Jeff Wilson over Butker. If we put Jeff Wilson over Butker, that leaves us with 6,800. That puts us in Rashee Rice territory. So, if you want to go heavy with these crapshoot receivers, you can do something like that. That's an interesting way to go. But, I tend to prefer Butker. I think Butker is going to be a much more consistent fantasy scorer than these wide receivers. Like you're basically rolling the dice on one of these receivers scoring, 10 plus fantasy points, where you can just put in Butker instead. And you put in Butker and you're getting that, that guaranteed, not guaranteed, but most likely double-digit fantasy points. So that's direction you can go there. For me, I kind of like the direction of going Tyreek Hill in the captain. We'll play around with this because I haven't really built too many lineups. I like Kelce as well. Let's put in Tua as well. I like that run game for the Miami side this week. So I'm going to put in Jeff Wilson. It's going to leave us with 8,400, 4,200 per guy. If I wanted to put in Butker in that situation, because I'm thinking that they're going to kick more field goals, that leaves me with 3,200. Dolphins and Chiefs D. That leaves us with like Berrios as an option. Not too high on Berrios, but Claypool. You got Justin. Got Watson too. Watson's another one of those guys I forgot to talk about, but he's another crapshoot guy. Like on that, if you in this range, we're just taking crapshoots at these wide receivers for the Chiefs side. If you wanted to take Kelce out and put in Mahomes, then at least that leaves you with Gray. Maybe Gray gets the tight end work on the two tight end sets, because maybe the corner is Ramsey or Howard is locking up Kelce pretty good, being physical with him, kind of preventing him from getting those soft spots in the zone or whatever. That makes it a little bit interesting. If we want to get weird with this, let's say we go with an under in this game. Let's say that those two linebackers being out for, let's say first of all that the two linebackers are both out for the Kansas City side. On top of them, maybe having lighter boxes against Tua. So let's say that Mostert, in his mom's home country of Germany, decides to have a huge game. So let's put Mostert in there. Let's put Tyreek in there because we know he's going to be getting all those PPR points. Let's put Kelce in there because we know he's going to be getting those PPR points. Let's look at Butker. Let's say that Mahomes isn't throwing those touchdowns, so Butker's in there, racking up points. And this is generally a low-scoring game since we're missing both quarterbacks out of it. So maybe it is a game where we have both of their running backs are performing against Kansas City, and that leaves us with 7,900. That leaves us with the ability to put in a guy like Rashid Rice if we wanted to. If we want to go a little bit different direction here, let's take out Butker. Let's put in Pacheco. Let's say it's a Pacheco game. Kelce's getting the PPR points, and Pacheco is getting, doing damage against light boxes that the Miami side is leaving. So that gives us a run-heavy game script. We know that both sides are probably going to want to run. Let's say both teams are a little bit sluggish playing international game. Kansas City especially kind of coming off of a Thursday flight. That leaves us with 4,500 left. Leaves us with options like McKinnon, Tony. If you wanted to go one of the Ds, I think one of the Ds would make sense in this type of build. If we wanted to say, maybe Patrick Mahomes, all those guys being sluggish, Mahomes, just barely recovering from the flu, has to jump on an international flight. He's sluggish coming into this game. Travis Kelce is, he's getting beat up by these cornerbacks. But he's scoring enough to get him in the optimal, but he's not having one of those elite games. Dolphins D, I could see using them in this type of matchup. We do have that familiarity that Vic Fangio has against the Chiefs. So we have a lot of things going in the Dolphins' favor. From a defensive standpoint, they're healthier than they've been for most of the season. We finally get to see this defense, Fangio get to use his entire defense for the most part. Makes it an interesting situation. If we wanted to take Kelce out and put Mahomes in that lineup instead, 3,700 is what it leaves us with. Still that same spot, where you can have these options. You have these options of the defenses. If you wanted to go Berrios, if you wanted to go Sky Moore and take a crapshoot on one of these wide receivers, if you wanted this as your core, maybe, and you rotate in those wide receivers on the Kansas City side, you got Hardman in there still that you can use. If we use Hardman, let's take out Jeff Wilson and put Hardman in there. That leaves us with 5,100. That leaves us with options like Valdez Scantling, McKinnon, guys like that. But at this point, I already got Hardman in there. I don't want to take too many crapshoots. I'd probably go with Butker. I can't go with Butker because he's 5,200. If you wanted to go Gray here and Butker, that would be interesting. And that would be something that you're able to do. So keep that in mind. That's another angle that you could go if you wanted to go with that Kansas City or that running game for the Miami side. But going 4-2, Miami is going to be a little bit different this week, according to what I'm seeing from optimizers. The lineups that I'm seeing, team stacks, I've got 33% 4-2s in favor of Kansas City versus 18% in favor of Miami. So Miami heavy scripts in a week where they have a travel advantage, in a week where they are healthier than they've been all season, in a week they got their offensive line potentially all back for the most part, Teron Armstead being potentially back. They also got their defense back. There's a lot of things that could point to a Miami, pulling the upset. They're only 1.5 point dogs, but Kansas City just being sluggish lately. They just came off a loss to Denver. Mahomes coming off this flu. They flew out late on Thursday. There's a lot of things going against Kansas City in this game. I kind of tend to like Miami. I think there's a chance that this game could go under. We've seen a lot of these high-scoring potential games go under, and could definitely see that happening this week, although it could go either way. But an under would be a way to play it with everybody, salivating to play the over. Those are some thoughts on this game. Like I said, hit like button. If I get 15 likes, I'll put out a shorter video later on tonight or early tomorrow with some of my favorite picks once we have a little bit more of the details coming in about who's for sure going to be out and who's going to be in this week. So just to kind of recap those injury notes, looks like CEH is out for sure. Linebacker on the Chiefs, Willie Gay, is questionable. Linebacker Nick Bolton is out. He's on IR. So if Willie Gay is out, that makes me interested in that run game on the Miami side. On the, as far as Miami's injuries, offensive lineman Rob Hunt is out. Safety Brandon Jones is out. Armstead and Connor Williams look like they're going to be back. That's huge for the offensive line. Safety Javon Holland is looking like he's back, just to add to more health on that secondary. And Xavier Howard is questionable, but looks like he'll play. So all signs are pointing up for that Miami side. So hit that like button, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel, and I will see you guys tomorrow with the Sunday night football breakdown. And I'll put out some sort of a stacks video at some point tonight or tomorrow as well. So subscribe to the YouTube channel and get those videos.